Brace for atmospheric friction, the automated voice suggested, right before the hull tore open. The drop pod's navigation matrix had failed 3 minutes ago. No one noticed until the correction burn never came. Jackson Rower gripped the harness as the cabin bucked sideways, and through the viewport, the Xylo's fracture rose to meet them. A sprawl of toxic fungal crust the color of old bone, split by seismic vents that wept chemical fire. The biome was rated for immediate casualty. She rated it a minor inconvenience. Around her, the squad braced in the standard positions. Synthar recruits, multi-eyed, fragile-jointed, hive-linked, occupied the port benches, their breathing synchronized like a single organism. Across from them, a Kaled heavy gunner named Esren occupied the reinforced seat, his armored carapace absorbing the impacts with stolid thuds. 3 other humans filled the gaps. None of them were looking at the viewport anymore. Jackson tapped the foil packet against her thigh. Sunflower seeds, salted. A thing from a world the Coalition had never classified, never mapped, never quite understood. She'd carried the packet through 800 deployments because it was light and it worked. A restless rhythm inside a plummeting cage. Navigation failure acknowledged, the pod system announced. Recalibrating, current descent, uncontrolled, impact in 40 seconds. She cracked a seed between her teeth. The sharp snap cut through the alarm tone. Squad, report integrity, came the voice over the comm. Commander Valik, 800 kilometers up on Command Deck Alpha, his Goran cranial plating would be darkening with stress, his sensitive auditory clusters locked on the falling metrics. Coalition doctrine said that anything below a survival probability threshold, and Category 9 zones had a threshold of 0, was already written off. Valik was professional enough to sound calm while he was writing them off. We are recording your final moments for the archive. Still breathing, Jackson said. She didn't raise her voice. The suit's mic would catch it. The Kaled heavy gunner looked at her. We are dead, he said. We all know it. Why are you eating? Keeps the hands still, Jackson said. The pod hit the crust at 120 kilometers per hour. The impact crumpled the landing struts into accordion folds. The hull breached on the starboard side with a shriek that made every non-human in the cabin flinch at once, a synchronized biological flinch, the kind that told you something was broken in the wiring of their bodies. Toxic spores hissed through the breach like a held breath finally released. The air inside the pod turned acrid. Jackson could taste minerals and decay on her tongue. Alarms cycled through their patterns. The Synthar recruits were still buckled in, but their eyes, all of them, all at once, had gone dead. It was a hive response. One of them had triggered the cascade, and now all 5 were in a biological lockdown state. Their fingers had gone slack on their weapons. Their breathing had stopped altogether. Synthar squad, acknowledge, Valik commanded from orbit. No one answered. After a moment, he changed course. All personnel, you are to immediately begin evasion protocols. Category 9 designation means. Jackson unbuckled her harness and stepped over the wreckage of a supply locker. Kaled's lower carapace had caught a fragment of the pod's support beam when they hit. The break was clean and catastrophic, the kind of thing that turned a 600-kilo soldier into a casualty in seconds. He was trying not to look at it. Jackson knelt beside him and drew the plasma tourniquet from her kit. The device was the size of a surgical pen. She triggered it, and a line of superheated gas sealed the wound, cauterizing the break surface. It was not gentle. It was not meant to be. The Kaled made a sound like grinding metal, but did not move. You're wasting time, he said. The evasion doctrine says. The doctrine was written for species with fear responses, Jackson said. She had already moved past him, pulling one of the paralyzed Synthar recruits out of his seat. The recruit weighed almost nothing to her, their joints all wrong, their physiology built for speed and coordination, not load-bearing. She placed him in the center of the crew compartment. Then the second, then the third, a ring, a center, a shape that said stand here and do not move. From orbit, Valik was still broadcasting. Evasion Vector 7 is your optimal. Jackson switched off her earpiece. She didn't need to hear it. She already knew what the manuals said. The manuals outlined survival. They did not account for boredom. The tremors started 30 seconds later. They came from the west, a subsonic hum that made the pod's frame rattle and the spore clouds inside the cabin begin to dance. Through the breach in the hull, Jackson could see the crust split open. Not a vent, not a geological feature, something was coming up out of the earth. It emerged in stages. First, the ridged carapace, a chitinous plate the color of old pewter, scarred and thick. Then the head. It had no eyes, no mouth that Jackson could recognize, just a massive, flattened skull with sensory ridges running across the top like a keyboard, all vibration-sensitive, all hunting by the electrical signature of prey fear. The Zolosian tunnel Goliath pulled its 6-ton mass out of the seismic vent and oriented on the pod. It had smelled the squad's panic from half a kilometer away. "Back squad, scatter now," Valek's voice came through all the other earpieces, not hers. "That is a direct." Jackson stepped out of the defensive ring and walked toward the breach. Jackson moved into the spore-choked air like she was walking across a parade ground. The tunnel Goliath's sensory ridges flared. It had registered motion, prey motion. The biological signature of the squad still radiated through the hull breach. 5 Syntha in a complete autonomic freeze, a Kalid bleeding chemical markers despite the tourniquet, 3 humans with elevated cortisol, elevated adrenaline, all of it screaming available food. The predator's ridges oriented on the source, locking onto the frequency of panic like a tuning fork. Then it detected Jackson. Her heartbeat was 62 BPM. Her cortisol was baseline. Her adrenaline was neutral. The Goliath's chemoreceptors sent contradictory data back to its primitive ganglia. Prey does not stand. Prey does not approach. Prey does not emit a calm electrical signature while a 6-ton apex predator materializes from the earth. Up on command deck Alpha, Valek had stopped broadcasting. The commander of the Coalition's 3rd Drop Battalion stood in front of his sensor array, staring at the telemetry feed from Jackson's suit. He had run the diagnostic 3 times. The biomonitor was clean. The transmission was clear. Pulse, 62. Cortisol, baseline. Adrenaline, baseline. System flags probable sensor failure. Except Valek had overseen 800 deployments. He knew what a failed sensor looked like, and this was not it. The realization moved through his cranial plating like ice water. She was not in shock. She was not panicked. She was not broken. She was completely, utterly, impossibly unafraid. "Jackson," he said into the comm. His voice was steady. The effort to keep it steady was visible in the darkening fringe around his Goran ears. "Report your psychological status." Jackson did not answer. She was too busy listening to the Goliath's approach. The creature moved with surprising grace for its mass. Each footfall sent a seismic pulse through the crust, vibrations that rattled the pod's frame and made the Synthar's paralyzed bodies shudder in unison. The beast was tracking her now, its ridged head swiveling, its sensory organs working overtime to reconcile the data. Here was prey-shaped movement, but prey-shaped movement did not radiate calm. Prey-shaped movement did not approach the predator. Prey-shaped movement did not. Jackson stepped over a shard of the pod's hull and planted her boots in the ash exactly 30 meters from the Goliath's snout. She could see the ridges better now. They ran from the creature's flattened skull down its entire carapace, a topography of vibration-sensing organs, all of them attuned to the electrical signatures of fear. The Goliath had never encountered a human before. The Coalition's home planet was redacted, its classification sealed, its biological profiles locked behind 7 layers of military clearance. What the Goliath had encountered were 1,000 prey species, all of which followed the same template. See predator, trigger chemical panic, run or freeze or fight in a predictable cascade. This one was standing still and chewing. Jackson reached into her utility pouch and drew out the foil packet. The motion was unhurried. She extracted a single seed and placed it between her molars. Then she bit down. The crack echoed like a gunshot in the spore-choked air. For 1 full second, the tunnel Goliath did not move. Its massive head hung suspended, its ridges frozen in a configuration that Jackson could read as clearly as words. What is this? The creature's ganglia were firing in patterns it had no framework for. Prey does not eat in the presence of death. Prey does not vocalize. Prey does not demonstrate the calm certainty of an apex organism. On the command deck, Valek's digits were trembling. His records showed 800 deployments across every coalition theater. 800 times, he had watched his soldiers fall into the behavioral patterns that made them predictable. 800 times, he had sent in rescue teams or written off casualties based on the biometric readouts, the doctrine, the cold calculus of survival probability. He had never, in his entire operational history, seen a human soldier emit the biochemical signature of an apex predator. Because humans weren't apex predators, they were baseline terrestrial, category 7 at best, good for colonization support and second-line defense. Their home planet was so restricted that he didn't even know its name, and yet. The tunnel Goliath backed up. It was not a sudden retreat. It was measured, deliberate, the movement of a predator encountering something it did not understand and did not want to engage. The creature's sensory ridges folded inward. Its massive frame rotated, and then it was moving back toward the seismic vent, its 6-ton mass sinking into the crust as though the Earth itself was reclaiming it. Within 30 seconds, it was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. No alarms, no tremors, just the faint hiss of spores settling through the breached hull and Jackson's steady, measured breathing as she cracked another seed between her teeth and spit the shell onto the ash. "Jackson," Valek said, his voice was barely above a whisper, "what did you do?" She turned back toward the pod and the paralyzed Synthar and the Kalid, who was still bleeding despite the tourniquet. The squad was starting to move. The Synthar recruits were blinking, their hivelock breaking as the immediate predator pressure subsided. One of them was weeping again, but this time it sounded like relief. "I told it we weren't on the menu," Jackson said. She was already moving back into the pod, already kneeling beside the Kalid to check the tourniquet. The plasma seal was holding. Blood loss had stabilized, barely. Valek said nothing for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all its command authority. It sounded the way a being sounds when their entire understanding of the universe has been fundamentally rearranged. The manual protocols state that Category 9 zones mandate immediate casualty acceptance and the manuals outline survival, Jackson said. She was pulling the second Synthar recruit to his feet now, her hand under his shoulder, supporting his weight. They do not account for boredom. On the command deck, Valek stared at his sensor array, at the telemetry that showed Jackson's heartbeat climbing now, not from fear, but from exertion, at the tunnel Goliath's seismic signature rapidly retreating into the depths, at the impossible fact that his entire doctrine, his entire framework for understanding tactical engagement, had just been obsolete. An emergency extraction shuttle was already being prepped in the hangar. Valek had sent the authorization the moment the Goliath began its retreat, standard protocol for a successful hold, except nothing about this was standard. Nothing about this fit any of the parameters he had spent 800 deployments perfecting. A notification flashed on his console. The shuttle was inbound, ETA 4 minutes. The shuttle touched down in a cloud of thermal wash. Its landing lights cut through the spore haze like knives, and the bay doors hissed open before the dust had settled. A medical team poured out, coalition standard, 2 Kalid paramedics with mobile trauma units and 1 Synthar in full hazard gear. Behind them came the retrieval squad, and behind them, moving slower, came a single Goran in command whites. Valek did not typically leave the command deck for a ground recovery. Protocol said he should oversee from orbit, issue orders, maintain tactical distance. But Valek's protocol had failed him 4 minutes ago, and he had spent those 4 minutes staring at telemetry that his mind could not reconcile. So he had suited up. He had entered the shuttle personally. And now he was walking toward the breached pod, his cranial plating still darkened with the remnants of his fear, his sensory clusters locked on a single human soldier who was carrying a Synthar recruit in each arm like they weighed nothing. Jackson saw him coming and did not slow down. She handed the first Synthar to the hazard-suited medic, then the second. The Kalid heavy gunner, Esren, was being loaded onto a trauma stretcher, the paramedics working with the efficient precision of beings who had done this 800 times. The other 3 humans were already moving toward the shuttle bay, their gear slung, their movements sharp with the muscle memory of survival. Valek stepped into her path. For a moment, neither of them moved. The shuttle's engines were cooling, the thermal wash fading to the point where Agoran's sensitive auditory clusters could pick up the finer frequencies. Valek's fringe was still darkening. Jackson's breathing was still perfectly calm. "Your biodata was compromised," Valek said. "It was not a question." "No," Jackson said. "It was accurate." "Sensors do not fail in that manner. They do not." Valek stopped. His digits were trembling again. "You were not afraid." Jackson reached into her utility pouch and drew out the foil packet. It was half empty now, the foil creased and worn. She turned it over in her hands like it was the most natural thing in the world. "The Goliath hunts by electrical signature," she said. "It reads chemical markers. It interprets behavior. What it found when it detected me was a baseline predator engaged in a routine behavioral pattern, eating, calm, unconcerned by its presence." She cracked another seed between her teeth and held Valek's gaze while she did it. "I wasn't hiding fear, I just wasn't producing it." Valek's entire frame had gone rigid. "Your species is classified for a reason," Jackson said. She spat the shell at her feet. "We don't panic. We don't trigger the cascade. We stand and we wait and we observe. And when something bigger than us shows up, we don't run. We just keep eating." She raised the packet slightly. "The manuals outline survival. They do not account for species that are already at the top of the food chain." The medical team was loading the last of the squad now. The shuttle bay was sealed. In 30 seconds, the extraction would be complete. Valek had maybe 60 seconds to process the fact that everything he understood about tactical doctrine, about fear responses, about the behavioral predictability that let him manage 800 deployments across 100 worlds, all of it was obsolete. He reached out and took the foil packet from her hand. For just a moment, Jackson let him. She watched his Goran digits close around the silver foil, watched his cranial plating darken to its deepest shade, not fear now, but something deeper. The realization that prey did not look like this. Prey did not hand its hunter a token and walk away. Jackson turned and boarded the shuttle without looking back. The hangar doors were already cycling. The thermal bloom erupted as the shuttle fired its ascent burn, climbing through the Xylo's atmosphere toward the relative safety of orbital space. Valek stood alone on the crust, the foil packet still in his grip, watching the shuttle's running lights shrink into the spore-choked sky. His comms officer was signaling. The squad had docked. Medical was beginning triage on the wounded. Standard post-operation protocol. All the familiar rhythms that had governed his career, his authority, his perfect understanding of how the galaxy worked. None of it meant anything anymore. He opened his grip and looked at the packet. It was ridiculous. A foil wrapper the size of his palm, half empty, carrying no tactical value whatsoever. And yet. 800 deployments. 800 times he had sent soldiers into danger. 800 times he had calculated odds, run doctrine through every scenario, proven that survival was a game of statistics and preparation, and understanding the enemy's fear response well enough to predict it, manage it, use it. And 800 deployments had not prepared him for a soldier who treated an apex predator like a minor inconvenience. Valek's senior tactical officer was signaling again. The shuttle was requesting clearance for docking procedures. He issued the authorization without fully hearing his own words. His visual sensors were locked on the foil packet, on the faint shimmer of salt residue on the silver surface, on the evidence of a species that had chewed on terror and spat out the shells. The communication array on the command deck received a priority message from medical. The Kalid would survive. The Synthar squad was recovering from biological shock. All 5 humans had cleared preliminary assessment. One human had walked into the path of a 6-ton apex predator with nothing but a packet of seeds and the absolute certainty that she would not die today. Valek was still holding the foil packet when the shuttle finished docking. The docking sequence completed without ceremony. Valek was still on the crust when the shuttle's secondary systems powered down. He could feel the weight of the foil packet in his grip, could see the salt residue catching what little light filtered through the spore clouds. Around him, the Xylo's fracture settled into its usual hum, the baseline seismic tremor that had nothing to do with predators and everything to do with a world that wanted nothing from the coalition except to be left alone. He turned and walked back toward the command shuttle. The flight deck crew did not ask questions when he boarded. They had their orders: get the commander back to orbital, facilitate medical triage on the survivors, file the standard after-action report. What they did not have was an explanation for why their commanding officer was carrying a half-empty foil packet of sunflower seeds like it was the most dangerous object in the known galaxy. The ascent burn kicked in. The Xylo's fracture fell away beneath them, and Valek pressed the packet against the viewport, watching the world shrink. Somewhere down there, a tunnel Goliath was retreating into its warren, its sensory organs still confused by the electrical signature of an apex organism that had simply refused to be afraid. Up here, Valek's entire framework for understanding the universe was doing the same thing. He reached his station on Command Deck Alpha to find his tactical officer waiting. The preliminary medical reports were clean, all 6 surviving soldiers cleared for standard decompression protocols. The Kalid would require surgery, but his carapace was already knitting. The Synthar squad was in biological recovery, their hivelock broken by exposure to the Jackson phenomenon. And Jackson herself was in the crew quarters, probably sleeping, probably not giving a single thought to the fact that she had just unraveled 800 deployments worth of tactical doctrine with nothing but a packet of seeds and the absolute certainty of an apex predator. "Sir," the tactical officer said, "your report on the incident, Coalition Records requires." Valek looked down at the foil packet, then back at his officer. "We encountered a Category 9 predator in the Xylo's fracture," Valek said. His voice was steady. The effort it took to keep it steady was a new kind of exhaustion. All personnel in the zone displayed appropriate fear responses. One soldier did not. "Malfunction in the biosuit." "No," Valek said. "The suit was functioning correctly. The soldier was functioning correctly. That was the problem." He placed the foil packet on his console and did not look away from it. "Jackson Roa's psychological profile shows no anomalies," the tactical officer continued, reading from the screen. "Standard terrestrial physiology, no chemical markers for suppressed fear response. She simply did not produce one." "Because," Valek said slowly, "her species evolved on a world where fear is not a survival mechanism, where standing still and being calm in the presence of a predator is not a sign of malfunction. It is a sign of dominance." The tactical officer's eyes widened. A Synthar might have frozen entirely, a Kalid would have argued. But this officer was Coalition standard issue, trained to process data even when the data contradicted everything they thought they understood. "That would suggest," the officer said carefully, "that humanity's homeworld classification is significantly more dangerous than currently listed." "It would suggest," Valek said, "that we have been classifying them backward for the entire duration of their integration." He left the packet on the console and walked to the observation window. Command Deck Alpha offered a perfect view of the Xylo system, the primary star, the scattered satellites, the debris fields where Coalition research stations had been lost to the biome's hostility. All of it seemed smaller now. All of it seemed less important. Because Valek had just realized something that no manual outlined and no doctrine prepared for. Humanity had evolved on a world so hostile, so fundamentally predatory, that their baseline psychological state was not fear. It was patience. It was the calm certainty of organisms that knew they were at the top of the food chain and did not need to prove it. And they had been living in Coalition space, integrated into Coalition military structures, operating under Coalition doctrine, for 3 integration cycles without anyone understanding what they actually were. The foil packet sat on his console like a tiny monument to a species that had chewed on terror and spat out the shells. A message came through the comms: standard medical clearance, All survivors cleared for duty resumption within 48 hours. Jackson Rower had already been reassigned to her next deployment, something about advanced reconnaissance on a frontier world. Of course, they were reassigning her. They always reassigned the ones who performed. Valek did not move from the observation window. He was still standing there when the shift rotation began, still standing there when his relief officer arrived, still standing there, staring out at the Xylo system and thinking about 800 deployments, about every time he had sent a soldier into danger with the absolute certainty that fear would drive them into predictable patterns, about every time those patterns had held because the soldiers were not truly apex. They were baseline terrestrial, good for support roles, reliable in structured combat. And one of them had just walked into the path of a 6-ton predator and treated it like an inconvenience. He turned back to his console. The foil packet was still there, silver and small and utterly impossible. He reached out and touched it, feeling the crease marks where Jackson's fingers had worked the seeds out, the salt crystals on the surface, the weight of something that should have been meaningless but had become the most important piece of data he had ever processed. The manuals outline survival. They do not account for boredom. Valek picked up the packet and held it to the light. The aluminium foil caught the reflection of the stars beyond the viewport. For just a moment, it looked like it was glowing. Then he set it back on the console and sat down in his chair. He did not move it. He did not file it away. He left it exactly where she had left it, a tiny silver monument on the desk of a commander whose entire understanding of the galaxy had just been fundamentally rewritten by a human who was probably sleeping, probably not even aware of the magnitude of what she had done. And in the quiet of the command deck, with the stars wheeling slowly overhead and the foil packet catching their light, Valek began to understand something that 800 deployments had never taught him. Prey does not step forward. Prey does not chew. Prey does not leave its hunter a token and walk away.